So we're going to start on a build of a new console table using this wood that we've got here. This will be made into the legs, and this will be made into the top. This is wood that you may recognize as being the oak log milled on the Worktable Sawmill. I'll post a link up here where you can watch that video. Anyway, what we're going to do first is take one of these pieces and get a straight line down one side, and then we can figure out exactly how much lumber can we get out of one of these pieces. So I'm going to start with this guy. Put this guy here, I'm going to put him on a sled, cut a straight line down here, and then we can put that straight edge up against the fence and cut off another straight piece. So we'll just start by getting some straight lumber out of these slabs. So I've got the piece set up in my sled. The first cut is going to be made. I just want to make sure I get a straight edge. So I have gone from the, first I've drawn a line down the piece where I'm going to make that cut. And I've made sure that that line is parallel to the fence. So by cutting this line now, we'll get our first straight edge on some rough sawn timber. And we're going to do this with dust collection. Well, that makes a lot less dust, I gotta say. There's still a little bit there, but you know, by and large. Whew. All right, and we have a nice straight edge now that we can work with on this piece. So I'm going to make a second cut now to get the widest possible piece of wood out of this. It'll need to be trimmed to length and of course some bits cut off the end, but I want to get some nice square edges so that I have something that we can start to work with. Once we have some, I'll call it dimensional lumber, we can figure out what piece we want to put where to make the top. So it looks like the most I'm going to get out of this is 5 inches. So I'll set the fence up for 5 inches and make that cut. Okay, here's a piece of wood that we can work with. I'll go do the same trick with 2 more pieces and then we'll see what we've got. So with our pieces cut, we have some lumber that we can work with. These 2 pieces are 6 inches in width. Actually, this one here is 6 1/4. This one is 6, and this piece here is about 5 inches wide. So what I am going to do is I'm going to cut these into 3-inch strips. It'll be slightly less than 3 inches on one of them. So this guy will be slightly less. It'll be about 2 7/8 or 2 15/16. this will be 3. In fact, I may be able to get just slightly more than 3 out of this. I might be able to get, what, 3 1/8? Or maybe 3 1/16 to make up the difference. So the combination of 4 pieces here will be 12 inches wide. That's the width of the table that I want. But we are a little bit short, and we're short probably by about 6 inches on each piece, totaling 24 inches. So what I'll do is I'm going to cut a 3-inch strip off this piece, and then I can cut 6-inch segments out of that, and we can put them in here to fill up the ends. So we'll put a 6-inch piece at this end, 6-inch piece at that end, and so we'll kind of insert the 6 inches into this piece, into these pieces, to give us the full 34-inch, maybe 36-inch, somewhere in there. We'll trim it off at the end, but we'll get a slab that's going to be 12 inches wide by 36 inches long, and then we can trim that to size as we see fit. So let me cut these into strips. Our strips cut, and with this bit you can see how by inserting a piece in like this we can extend the length of the table. So what I'm going to do now is mark off on these strips that we've been cut, just kind of get square edges on like want to cut that bit off, so we'll get a square edge there and a square edge. Just cut off the scrap at the end so that we can figure out exactly where we want to tack on the extra 6 inches. So the piece is roughly laid out. That represents 34 inches from one end to the other end. And you can see that I need a small piece here and a couple pieces about the same size here and a slightly larger piece there. I measured them all out, and what I found is on the extra piece that we cut off, I have at that line, that's the small piece that represents the piece that will go there. I have another piece here that would fit in down here, another piece here that'll fit here, and another piece between here and here that'll fit into that section. So we got enough to make a slab that's going to give us the table that we want with the appropriate size. What I will probably do though, I don't really like this kind of staggering where these two pieces are equal and the short pieces are at the end. So I'll probably wind up cutting this piece in about the middle, and one of these sections of the table will have 3 pieces rather than 2, but that'll even it up in the end, over the end. So we'll, first thing I need to do though is cut these pieces to make sure that we have all the bits to the jigsaw puzzle that we need. So there's the makings of a tabletop. Overall, it's not bad. I'm crazy about this little bit here. Perhaps that would make a better arrangement. Okay, I'm going to go with that. So I'm going to make sure that any piece that is lined up linearly is exactly the same width. So I've got the pieces arranged the way that I want them, and I like to put everything together just before gluing, even to the point of just laying clamps in place so I know exactly where the clamps are going to go, what clamping pressure I want. I draw a line across the wood at every point where I want to apply pressure. Just that way it just saves any confusion at the end and panic about setting up clamps as the glue is starting to firm or set up. So with all the clamps in place or laid out the way I want them, I'll just stack them off to the side in the order in which I can put them back on the piece. You know, a little obsessive compulsive behavior there, I guess. So what I will do now is lay up these pieces on the edges that are going to get glue. So I will put glue along here and here, down here, here, down here, 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 down here, here, and a bit in here, and then I can just lay them all together, clamp them on. So we'll get on with that. Probably time for a suitable piece of music. Cue the music. So since installing the dust collection system, I have had a lack of sawdust that I used to clean up glue joints like this. So I had to go scrounge around and actually dig to find some sawdust that I can use to wipe up this glue. So a funny but pleasant offshoot of the dust collection system. Just going to get a long clamp and just bring this piece in tighter. There seems to be a little bit of a gap there. All right, we're glued. This is likely going to be the top. I tried to press everything down tight on the table so that these become flush all across. There may be a little bit of unevenness on the other side because the thickness of the wood varies a little bit. But that's what you have with rough cut lumber. So we'll let this set up and come back when it's all dry. Okay, we're back from the glue up, took the clamps off it, and what I find is a little bit of a high spot here, a little bit of a high spot over here, and a little bit of a high spot here. So I'm just going to take the hand plane and trim this down on each of these two spots and then this spot, just bring it down a little bit. And then I think we're good just to use a sander to get this surface to the point that we want it for the finish of the table. That's not bad. Nothing that 80 grit sandpaper won't deal with. Or the thickness planer if I choose to do that, but I think that's going to be close enough for sandpaper. Again, this piece is not going to be a mirrored finish surface. That's not the intent at all here. We're going for something that has a little bit of character in it, so yeah, not perfection, that's not the intent. It's not a factory finish piece. Just going to go in this area a little bit. Yeah, it's feeling pretty good. So flip the board over and we'll take care of this little end here. By using the plane, that's a lot less sawdust flying around the air from the sander. Just this piece here that I want to get rid of. A little high there. It's a workout. Whew. All right, I'm going to go with that. There's a little bit of a low spot here, but I think that'll just become a bit of character of the piece. Okay, just going to check it all up with the straight edge, see how we look. Gonna take a little bit out of there. That's good. That's much better than it was. Yeah, that's good too. So, just this bit here, this is a little bit high. As a result, it kind of makes this, over-pronounces an arch this way. So I just take a little bit off here, that'll kind of flatten out the whole edge. And clearly I'm going against the grain there. That's a bit of a problem. go with that. That's going to require a little bit of sanding. I got some chunks out of that bit. I don't like it. To the sander. I've gone over the entire top of the table now with my little orbital sander, little palm sander. I like to use that sander for doing rough work because I can kind of tilt the edge and really get into some hard to get to surfaces, or areas rather. And again, on this top, I'm not looking for a perfectly flat finish. I am looking for a little bit of contour to it. So when you rub your hand over it, you can feel, you know, a little bit of a curve here and there. It's kind of nice. I like that organic nature to it. However, on the bottom side, it's a little bit more uneven. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it through the thickness planer just to kind of take off a little bit of wood like this, even up some of these valleys in here, just to get it a little bit closer so that I can come back with the sander. I don't want to wind up doing all of this, taking off all this material with the sander. That would just put too much dust in the air and probably take a little bit too long. Already I've sharpened up the blades and we'll run this piece, our little console table top. I'll start running it through the plane here and get it evened out a little bit. All right, I'm very pleased with the how that went. I got this evened up reasonably well. Still a few little ridges, but that's okay. I'm just going to take those out with sanding. I'm not going to make it a perfectly flat top, so it'll have a little bit of contour to it. Same thing with the top. So overall, I'm pleased. More than anything, stunned by what this dust collector has been able to pick up. The difference that it makes is phenomenal. Normally when I use this thickness planer, the surface planer, I just have piles of sawdust, half a garbage bag it seems to me. So I'm going to take a look in the bin, see what I got. One thing I did observe too is one of these magnets that I put into this dust collector is in backwards, so I'm going to have to take that out and put it in the right way. Anyway, I'll fix that when I receive the new magnets that I've ordered. They should come tomorrow. Okay, I'm ready to do some more sanding on this top. I'm going to do a quick scuff on the top surface of the piece, and then I'm going to go over and use my little sander to do the bottom side. Last time I was trying to keep this dust collection hose in place, and I had a couple clamps kind of positioned around, and it occurred to me a really simple little jig. So I just knocked together this little prototype. Just cut a little, that's a 3 3/4 inch gap there with a circle around it. Drew the circle from the lid of a paint can, a 1-quart paint can. And what that lets me do is just slide that onto the hose. And now I can simply clamp that in place. What I intend to do, and my original thought on this, is put magnets on the bottom of that little clamp, and then I can set it anywhere on any work surface. I can put it on the drill press anywhere I want. I can put it anywhere here, keep it over close to the router table. So it just might be really handy to have this little gizmo, and it gives me flexibility to put that hose wherever I want, and the hose will stay put, relatively speaking. All right, anyway, on to sanding. Let me get into there. So I'm using some 80 grit paper on this little sander. As I move up into finer sanding, higher, 120, 180, and ultimately 220, I'll switch to the orbital sander. I find the orbital sander does a little nicer job and a little more consistent job, and doesn't leave all the little swirl marks that this will leave. The top is now ready. What it'll take is just want to trim it up exactly to length so we'll have a nice square top. Not sure, but I haven't treated the edges yet, but I'll wait until we're a little bit farther along. I will just fill in a couple of the little cracks with some wood filler. That may come out when we do our final finish, but we'll see. And then we can now move on to the legs. So I now have 3 sides jointed on this piece that will be used to make leg. 2 legs actually. What I'm going to do now is joint the other side. Since I got 3 square sides, I can put this on and run it through like so. I'll bring up the other piece that I also have jointed on 3 sides. So we can get them both done. And do one more test to make sure our blade is at 90 degrees. That last cut seemed to be off just a smidge, so let's just double check. And yes, I can see it off a bit. That's better. And I'm going to lock it in place. Now the thinnest part of this leg is right about here. So I'll move the blade in, or the fence in, to accommodate that amount. And then a smidge more. Smidge is my favorite measurement. Let's give that a shot, doing the whole thing in one pass. We'll just go slow. Make sure my sleeve is out of the way. So even with dust collection, that kind of a cut where I'm just skimming the edge of the piece still generates a lot of sawdust because it just comes flying out the blade from all aspects. However, the dust collector sure does a much better job. I mean, without it, it would be crazy. All right, now we can cut these legs to a taper. I'll cut them to approximate length first, and then cut them. All right, I got my taper jig set up with the right angle. It appears to be about 2.5 degrees, a little less, maybe 2.25. We're gonna have 1 inch here, and at this end it's gonna be about 1 7/8 by the time I get through the kerf. And 1 inch here, 1 7/8 there. So both pieces are set up the same width, same length. I trimmed off to the same, got to the same dimensions. So let's run this through and get a taper. That's a lot of dust. I forgot the dust collector. So the next bit with the tapering jig is to cut this piece out so they wind up with an inside, tapered in 2 dimensions. And of course the trick is I can't make both legs the same. So I need to flip one of them over. Gotta be kind of careful handling these pieces. With the hardwood, these sharp edges are really sharp. So I kind of need to be careful of them. So what I'm doing, I've marked 1 inch of a width on the bottom. I've marked the width that I want the bottom of the leg. That's 1 inch from here. That's what that is. And what I want is that 1 inch at the bottom of this taper jig to be just inside the blade. So that would give me that would have the piece come through exactly where I want it. Now I just need to figure out where it wants to come in at the beginning of the blade. Beginning of the leg, rather. So that's a little bit far down. So this is where I'm going to have a little bit of back and forth. Where I want the leg to be engaged, here, I'm going to move the fence in about half that amount and then adjust this angle a little bit, wee bit. That's not a lot to come in. Coming in that far, probably threw this off by about 1/16 of an inch, which is about right. So I want to adjust this a smidge. That'll have that come through properly, the right spot. And we will get engagement on the leg. about here. That's going to be perfect. I'm happy with that. So we'll let her rip with dust collection. So notice going through there that these two legs are actually a little bit wider than these legs. So what I'm going to do is set the fence be exactly that width off the flat side. And now I'm going to run these guys through just to get them to have the same flat that these have at the top edge. Okay, there we are. We've got some legs tapered in two directions. Came out perfect. So kind of a nice rectangular shape up there, but they tapered down into a perfect square at this end. I'm good with that. And these legs do have some character marks on them, so they're going to come out real nice. They'll come out nice. So we're now set up to cut the bevel on the legs so that they'll stand like this. That's a 10-degree cut. I have marked every piece to make sure that I get the flat edge up against the miter, which means, as you may have seen from the other console table that we built, that means that for some of the cuts, half of the cuts, I'm putting the miter on this side of the leg, and on the other cuts, the miter will go on that side of the leg. That's just to make sure that I cater for the flat edge. Remember, these legs have tapers in two directions, so I want to make sure I'm going with the flat side. So I've been very careful to mark every piece the right way, and now I can take this taper off. So I'm just going to kind of creep up on this to avoid having chunks of material fly off. I just want to deal with sawdust. So we'll cut these legs now. What'll happen now is I turn the blades over, I'll set up an end stop here, and then cut these off to length. Okay, block is set in place. We'll cut off this end. Okay, legs are cut. Now we can work on the little cross member that'll support the legs on the top of the table. But first I want to get that tabletop all squared up, so we'll do that next. Though I love my table saw, for doing this kind of a cut, I'm going to use my circular saw. I can clamp the piece down, I can clamp a guide down, and that way, just trying to get that through my table saw off the miter is not so easy. It tends to sway from side to side. I suppose that's a good reason for having a table saw sled, but a circular saw will do just fine. A little sand on that edge will be good, and we'll trim up the other edge. Okay, our tabletop is now cut to length. It's just shy of 34 inches, so it's about 33 and 7/8, maybe 33 and 13/16, something like that. But that's okay. None of these tables are intended to be exactly accurate on, to the 64th of an inch. So we kind of go ish. It's about, it's this big. It's 34-ish inches. Next on the docket will be the little piece that holds the legs together and allows us to mount the legs onto the table. So I have my leg pairs set up, lined up. And the critical bit here is making sure I know where I want to notch the legs so that they will sit in this piece appropriately. And what I have done is marked a little X there at the top of the leg. That's the portion I want to cut out, so there's no confusion when I get things set up in the jig. So I have set my blade height to the width of this piece. That's the cross member that goes between the two. Now I just need to get my fixture on the table and get that lined up appropriately to make these cuts. So I'll set that now. So I want to go 3/4 of an inch to the outside edge of the blade. No, I want to be 3/4 to the inside edge of the blade so that I get the 3/4 inch, because I'm cutting it through this way, the waste material's on this side. So I want to make sure that I'm 3/4 of an inch. The fence is here, so I want to be 3/4 of an inch to the inside of the blade so that I get that taken out. So I made that mistake the last time I cut these legs. I'm using my little flat stock here to avoid any pressure damage done to clamping on this leg. We're set to make that cut. So I'll do these cuts. Again, no points for speed, so just take these really slow. All right, now we have those legs cut, or those slits cut. The next step will be putting them on the saw like so, cutting them through, just to get that out of the way. So to do that, I need to set my miter at 10 degrees, set the depth of cut to be here, and then I'm going to use, once again, our little wedge pieces that we cut off. Just to support the leg like that, so that this is perfectly vertical. Okay, got my piece set up. The two legs I'm going to cut this way. with the miter on the back. Then I'm going to have to flip the miter around, change the angle to 10 degrees the other way, and run the other two legs through. Okay, so that is all the cutting that we need to do on the legs. A little bit of sanding on the very bottoms, and of course some finishing work. So now let's get this piece ready to accept. Oops, I'm putting that in the wrong way. That fits in there like that. That's how we want it. So now I need to cut this piece to length. So we'll bring up the tabletop, figure out where we want these, and then we can make the appropriate cut. So our total width here is 11 and 13/16, so a little shy of 12. 11 and 13/16 minus, let's say 2, 3.5, 8 and 5/16, which is going to be about 8 and 5/16 is the length that this piece needs to be. So I'm going to cut off 2 of these. So I have this little 1/4-inch piece of wood here, a little spacer block. So I'm going to set the fence up to be 8 and 5/16 plus 1/4 of an inch. That way I can line up my piece way back of the blade and then put it through without any fear of getting jammed. So there I am at 8 and 5/16, but I have space here, so I'm not going to at any risk of having this piece jam up in there and give me kickback on the blade. So our legs will sit in like so. Now notice I do have a little bit of rocking here, which is not a terrible surprise because I didn't spend a lot of time making sure this piece was perfectly flat. So I'm going to get the orientation of where I want this to be in terms of front towards the front and back of the leg. Then I'm going to trace the contour that I've got here and use the bandsaw just to kind of cut out that contour so this sits nice and flush against the table itself. So I'm taking a new approach. These little pieces that I cut out on the bandsaw, yeah, I can get them to fit there reasonably well. The challenge though is because I cut so much off them, they no longer fit inside the legs very well, so I have these huge gaps. You know, I'm out by 1/8 of an inch on this one. I don't know if you can see that, but it makes sense because I cut a fair bit out of it to make that contour. So that leaves me with legs that are going to be a little wobbly, and I'll have to address that, you know, down the road. So I thought, hang on, there might be a better way to do this. So my thinking is, rather than cut the contour out of this piece, why not flatten that portion of the table? So to that end, I have created this little jig, just 2 pieces of MDF held together with some flat stock so that these 2 pieces are parallel and in line. Then I can run the router on here, just kind of back and forth. That gives me a perfectly flat surface that would let the bit extend down and flatten out the table underneath. So I'm going to take that approach. Then I can set my pieces in place. And there'll be a little bit of sanding after the fact, but if I'm careful, I don't have to do too much. So the challenge, of course, is making sure that this flattening jig is securely put in place and won't rock as I'm routing the piece. So I'm going to try this approach. All right, I got you in for a very close look. I've got a 5/16 router bit set up in here. I've put guide rails on. I'm going to give that a shot. I'm just going to take a very light pass over the surface here just to see what happens. What could possibly go wrong? And that's doing everything right. Let me bring you in close and you can see what I'm doing. There we are. Okay. A little bit of a ridge where we cut it away. So this part is going to be perfectly flat. I think this technique will work, so I'm going to carry on. Alrighty, I think that will work. This side didn't have a lot that needed to come off it, so I'm probably just going to keep that as is. So I'll take the clamps off and let's just see. Well, actually, before I do that, I'll put a flat edge on there. Oh yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Proof of concept works. We'll go down to the other side. That one's going to be a little bit more material to remove, but overall that technique works. I'll give that a little bit of a sand as well. All right, I have the other end set up, ready to go. I may wind up having to make a couple passes here, but we'll start with the same depth of cutouts we did on the other side. So that did okay, but I can feel there's still a bit of an edge over here. So I'm going to go down just a little wee bit and do that again. This technique is going to work okay. Okay, we now have a real nice little pocket. It's perfectly level for our leg to sit in. That is going to work out wonderfully well. Okay. Little leveling technique there for you. So now we can attach the legs. So that'll be our next step. So I'm just going to use my little palm sander here to remove the little bit of a ridge that is the transition from this new flat spot that we did with the router to the surface of the table. I just kind of want to bevel that off a little bit so that there's no sharp ridge. One other thing I did for my little dust hose holder jig that I constructed, I put a magnet on the bottom of it. That's kind of one of those really nice, powerful magnets. So it's screwed in there, so I can slip my hose on, and that little holder now will stick to the saw or whatever metal surface I want to put it on. So in this case, it's going to be very handy to kind of keep the hose in close proximity of the sanding. So I'll turn on the sander and you'll see how that all works. I got that transitioned nicely. Again, we'll go over the whole thing with finer sandpaper as we get closer to finish. Really happy with how the dust collector, I'm not sure if it'll show up on video, but I could just see the dust going from the sander, sucked right into the dust collector. So yeah, big improvement to the shop to have dust collection. Again, thank you very much to the viewers that have been kind of encouraging me, sometimes in strong language, to get dust collection. Huge difference to the shop already, and I'll continue to be making improvements as I go. Keep your comments coming. I do read them, and I do appreciate everything that you guys are saying, so thank you so much. Okay, I have our legs clamped together on this little cross piece that we've assembled, ready to join it. What I'm going to be doing is using a 1/8 inch bit coming through about like so. That'll get me deep into the leg here. And then I'll use a Forstner bit just on the top to drill fundamentally a recess for a pocket screw. The Forstner bit will give a nice shoulder for that pocket screw to grab onto. So that's the screw we're going to use, and I want to make sure that I'm drilling that pilot hole that's going to be deep enough. I think I need to. And what I like to do with the Forstner bit is go in about the depth of the head of the Forstner bit. I'll use a screwdriver to put this in the first time. I like to use a screwdriver just to make sure the threads are cut nicely. Next time this screw goes in, when I go to glue the joint together, I'll use a driver, knowing that the hole has been, I use the term tapped. Fantastic. I can see the leg being pulled in tight to this piece, so I know that I've bottomed out on the shoulder of the screw, and I'm now drawing the wood in. So that's good. Let's do this one. Excellent. One leg assembly complete. So I have a leg assembly clamped now to the table. Of course, it's not really tight, but it's just positioned where I want it to be. So what I'm going to do now is drill a couple pilot holes, one here at a slight angle and one here at a slight angle. And we'll be using the same kind of pocket hole technique to use these screws to hold this assembly onto the tabletop. You may notice I switched to a little ratcheting screwdriver. Okay, that's nice. Now we'll drill those holes. All right. That's one leg assembly done. So I'll do the same thing on the other end and come back when that's finished. All right, we've got the legs assemblies mounted to the surface underside of the table. Now we can work on the cross members that'll go from leg to leg. So I'm going to cut a couple strips for that and come back when we're ready to do some fitting. All right, I've got our two cross members cut to rough shape. This again came from the same oak log that we got our tabletop from. So these pieces are going to go in here from leg to leg, kind of like so. What that requires is a compound cut on this end of the leg where it meets the leg at a 15-degree angle and a 12.5-inch taper. Same thing on this side. So both pieces need to be cut on both ends with that compound caper. And then we're going to need to do a lap joint in the middle. So I'm going to focus first on getting the pieces fitting in here with the 15-degree 12.5 compound cut. I'll do that on the table saw using the combination of the tilt of the blade and the tilt of the miter. So the camera ran out of memory as I was recording that last little bit. What you missed was me cutting these little cross-member pieces and getting these compound angles put in place, and this lap joint. This turned out okay. I'm kind of pleased with the result of that. Got a very good flush finish and pretty tight tolerances there. Oops, there we are, tight tolerances. All right, I got a bunch of clamps on this table now. So we have a clamp here and on the other leg here, holding this cross member in place. And the purpose of that is to keep the legs the correct distance apart and also to provide a surface on which our cross member here can rest as I drill this hole. I don't want this to be slipping down, so that cross member will keep it at the right height. I also have a clamp on holding this little piece in here, and that will let me insert this just as a little wedge to keep the cross member in the center of the leg, so it won't drift that way at all as I drill it. I'm expecting to be holding the piece like this as I drill, so that'll keep it in place. Also, I have one more long clamp here running between the two members, just kind of holding the whole thing, the legs together, taut where I want them to be, so there'll be no slipping around. So I'm ready now to drill. I'm just going to drill this hole, then I'll drill and get this piece put in using kind of the same rough mechanism, and then we'll put on the other cross member, do the same thing. But let me get the camera set up so you can have a look at what's going on here first. Okay, that's good. Happy with that. Now we'll come over here and do the other side. Actually, what I'll do is I'll flip the table around because I got this all set up. It's easier to reach it right here than it is to try and go crosswise over there. All right, that's one cross member in. Now I'll go through the same process and do the other side. Okay, there we are. So the next step in our table build is take it all apart again, sand down the edges, glue the joints and put it back together. And then we can do a final sand and get ready for stain. Okay, so all of our pieces have been sanded down with rough sand. All of the edges have been broken, so they're nice to touch. What we'll do now is final assembly. So that means that these pieces, the legs, once they get glued together, the legs will be glued and screwed together. The cross piece, when finally assembled, will have glue in that joint That's all the glue that we're going to use on the table. The rest will be held in place with screws. And we're now ready for some final sanding, so I'm going to go over this with 120, 180, then 220. But in preparation for doing that, I'm also taking a bunch of offcuts. And I'm going to go through the sanding process with this. I'm going to give them an 80 grit sand to give them smooth and get rid of all the saw marks. Then 120, 180, 220. And then we can use these pieces to get some sample stain colors. Figure out what it is we want. So here are 3 stain samples that I put together. I've got some weathered oak, some chestnut, and some espresso. And what I found, I really didn't like the way that the weathered oak was looking. It put a little too much gray in the piece. And since I have a combination of white oak and some red oak, there seemed to be a little bit, the red oak seemed to stay a little too red for my liking. Moving on to the chestnut, I liked it. It didn't go quite dark enough from the white oak. Now I could probably leave it on a little bit longer, but the chestnut stain I've got is a gel stain. It's not a penetrating stain. This last stain is espresso, and that's the stain that I've decided to go with. So that it's a Minwax Espresso 273. So I have gone ahead and stained the entire table. But I noticed I had, after staining it, I had a couple of swirl marks from the 80 grit on the orbital sander that I had not been careful enough to take out. So I've sanded off the top again, spending a little bit more time with the 120, then more time with 180, and a lot of time with the 220. So I'm ready to put this stain on again, to restain the top, and I'll show you how I go about doing that. So I recognize that the technique that I use is probably not the same as the technique everybody else would use, and this is what works for me. The recommendation with this stain is you leave it on for 3 to 5 minutes before wiping it off. But I don't want this to be dark. I want this to remain quite light, so I'm going to put it on and rub it off almost immediately, at least as fast as I can. So I'll get a little bit of stain on. And I'm not worried about covering everything with that brush, and I'm not doing the whole table at one time, as you can see. But I am going to wipe it on, kind of swirl it into the wood. I get it off almost as fast as I can. So that leaves a nice lighter brown than I would have if I let it sit for a while. It'd get nice and dark. No, nothing wrong with dark, but for this piece I don't want it to be too dark. I want it to be a lighter brown. just rubbing it over a few times like this, I found helps to even out the stain across the piece. And I'm going to call that stained. So that needs to set up for about 4 hours, which means, given the time of day, I'll probably come back tomorrow to put on my first coat of polyurethane. In fact, both coats of polyurethane will go on tomorrow. That dries up pretty fast. So there's our console table, reassembled, stained, and two coats of polyurethane. So we're ready to take that in and stage it, but I hope you like this video. Please like and subscribe.